Hello everyone and welcome to Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. As we begin this comparison test, I only have two favors to ask of you. One, if you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. And two, whenever you're shopping for parts and gear, please use my affiliate links. It helps keep this kind of thing going and I really appreciate that. All right, these three bikes right here, the Suzuki V-Strom 800DE, the Honda Transalp 750, and the Yamaha Tenere 700. These represent the Japanese entries into the middleweight adventure motorcycle segment. Make no mistake, these are three of the most practical, versatile, comfortable, and capable motorcycles you can buy, period, even if you never plan to really go off-road. Now, the really tough thing for me about comparison videos and comparison tests and shootouts is that everybody expects there to be a clear winner. But that's such a hard thing to do because, of course, different motorcycles have different pros and cons, and depending on what your needs are as an individual, one bike might be better for you than the other, and it's really hard to pick a winner. Now, having said that, I do actually have a favorite among these three, and I'm going to share that at the end of this video. So I really want to focus this comparison review on things that actually matter to the average everyday adventure bike buyer throughout the world. Because you go on Instagram, you go on Facebook, on YouTube, and you see these crazy videos of people flying off rocks and jumps and cliffs on these gigantic adventure bikes. But we all know that that's not reality. Those are paid professional stunt riders who riding modified bikes. And at the end of the day, while it's cool to see it, it really is just marketing. The average person that buys a bike like this, here's what you're probably doing. You're gonna use it to commute to work during the week, so it's not just sitting in the garage taking up space. You're on the weekends, if you're lucky, you'll have time to maybe go out and ride some dirt roads, some gravel roads, hit a few trails with your buddies if you're lucky to have access to that. And maybe a couple times a year, you might be lucky enough to go on a camping trip. You're not doing the things you've seen in the videos and flying off rocks and jumps. All right, so a little bit about how I'm going to structure this comparison shootout so you know what to expect and kind of how things are going to go. So we'll start off, I'll take you for each of the three bikes, we'll briefly cover the specs and I'll show you the features of each bike. Then after that, I'll show you the seat height and the riding position between the three bikes. Then we'll do the famous drop and lift test to see which bike is easiest, which bike is hardest to lift. After that, we are going to put each of the three bikes on my test loop. So for this test, I designed a test loop. It's around 150 miles, or I don't know what that is in kilometers, maybe 250 kilometers. It has a good mix of 2-lane highway, 4-lane high-speed freeway, twisty mountain roads, and a good chunk of off-road, which is like a fire road, Jeep trail kind of off-roading, which is what most people do with these bikes. And on the test loop, I controlled the variables between the bikes as much as I could. I used the exact same riding gear, the same helmet, the same jacket, just to make sure nothing changes. I set the tire pressures the same on all three bikes, and I set all the suspension settings on all three bikes to make sure they're kind of at the factory middle of the road setting. So I controlled it the best I could. Then once we're done with all that, for each, after each test loop for each bike, then I'll give you the report card, the Big Rock report card, which is a new thing I'm doing for each bike. I'll give you the summary of the pros and cons for that bike, and then we'll move on to the next bike. Once all that's done, we'll go back outside. I'll give you the answers to what I think are the frequently asked questions, a sort of rapid fire Q&A for this comparison. And then finally, at the end of that, I'll have some closing thoughts and I'll tell you why it's hard to pick a winner, but also that I did kind of have a favorite bike in this comparison. Now, let's start off by getting a little bit acquainted with the bikes and talking about some things that all these three bikes have in common. So to start with, they all cost in US dollars between around 10 to around 11,500 US dollars. So they're all around a similar price point. The next thing is they all have off-road friendly large 21-inch front wheels. Now, to risk being a little bit negative, there's two things that none of these bikes have that everybody has said that they wanted. One is tubeless tires, tubeless wheels. All three of these bikes use tubes, which is very an interesting choice by the manufacturers, knowing that most of these bikes are used most of the time for highway riding and touring, where you really would prefer a tubeless wheel, a tubeless tire for ease of puncture repair. The second thing that none of these bikes have, mysteriously, even though they all have ride-by-wire electronic throttle, is none of these bikes come from the factory with cruise control. This makes no sense, and this is my personal plea. If any of the manufacturers are listening, on behalf of all of us adventure riders, we go on the highway, we do long trips, it's a necessary part of what we do, and we really want cruise control. We don't want to have to upgrade to the super high-end model in your lineup just to get that one feature. These bikes are already electronic throttle. Please add in factory cruise control. I'm asking that on behalf of all riders because I see thousands of comments about that asking why they don't have it. Now, on the subject of cruise control, I do want to bring up, at the risk of being a shameless plug here for one of my affiliate programs, which is Viridian Cruise. They're not sponsoring this video, actually, but I do want to mention that Viridian Cruise out of Canada has aftermarket plug-and-play electronic cruise control available for the V-Strom, the Transalp, and the 2025 Tenere, and it's actually installed on that bike, and I have a whole video about it. If you want to buy Viridian Cruise control for any of these bikes or any other adventure bike that you have, go to the Viridian Cruise website. But before you do that, I have a special link that I've arranged for all of you, my viewers, as a discount code. It's a pretty significant discount. I think it's a 12 or 15% discount. Use my link. I do get a small commission to help support the channel, but you'll save money on the cruise control system. And they have a lot of different bikes, including all these three. So please do go check them out. All right, let's attempt to quickly cover the specs, and I'll take you a walk around, show you kind of the design and features of the Tenere 700. So MSRP for 2025, $10,999 US dollars. The wet weight of this bike is 460 pounds or 207 kilograms. The engine is a 689cc, so the smallest engine in the test. It's a parallel twin, of course, and the rated power output is the lowest in the test, 72 horsepower, and the torque is also the lowest in the test at 50 foot-pounds or 68 Newton meters. The wheel sizes on the bike are a very off-road oriented 21-inch front and 18-inch rear. Seat height on the bike is the tallest in the test at 34.4 inches or 874 millimeters. It has a pretty long wheelbase compared to the other two bikes of 62.8 inches or 1,595 millimeters. Fuel capacity is the lowest in the test, 4.2 gallons or 16 liters. We'll cover the observed fuel economy and the estimated riding range when we do the ride test. Suspension travel is in the middle of the pack. It's not as good as the V-Strom in terms of overall suspension travel, but it's better than the Transalp. So you're looking at 210 millimeters or 8.3 inches in the front and 200 millimeters or 7.9 inches in the back. Your major service interval, the valve clearance inspection, the expensive services, is much longer on this bike than the other two, which will reduce your servicing cost over the long run. It's 26,000 miles or 42,000 kilometers, which is absolutely fantastic for a modern motorcycle to have that. Now, as we do our walk around of the features of the bike, do keep in mind I have a few aftermarket parts on here because this has been my long-term project bike, unlike the other two bikes which are stock that I borrowed from the manufacturer. So I've tried to discount any of the effects that these would have in terms of evaluating the bike side by side. I've done my best to do that, and I'll try to point out what's not factory on the bike. I do want to point out in the front how that Yamaha has given us a low fender, which is nice, but they've also given us a lot of clearance under here for mud and rocks, which the other bikes do not have. So this is more thoughtfully designed, I think, for the off-road rider. And you're gonna see that theme throughout this bike with the foot pegs, the way the controls are set up, the ergonomics, the way that the electronics work. It's really set up for somebody who wants to do a lot of off-roading. You can see our 21-inch front wheel, our suspension here, which has these nice gold forks. Brembo brakes, which are very, very nice to have. I've got an aftermarket skid plate on the bike. This is a Tusk Quiet Glide skid plate. So the factory skid plate is a lot thinner than that. Sorry about the camera movements. I really apologize for that. I'm also sorry if you hear the birds in the background, but I do live in the mountains and I can't get rid of the bird noises. These are aftermarket SW-Motec crash bars. The bike obviously does not come with that. Now, moving around here on the sides, I forgot in the front to point out the lighting. Really cool front headlight design, really nice looking. Also LED turn signals and the one-piece windshield now for 2025. These handguards are aftermarket bark busters that did not come with those. This is the stock brake lever. The rear brake on this bike is terrible. We'll talk about that. The foot pegs, however, are amazing. These are probably the best factory foot pegs on an adventure bike I've ever seen. These are new for 2025 and they are phenomenal. Why would you ever change these out? These are as good as most of the aftermarket upgrades you see out there. Very, very happy with that. And it just, again, shows that Yamaha is really committed to the off-roader with this bike. Now, one thing they're not committed to is fixing this exhaust thing, because this hanger here is part of the subframe. This will get pushed in when you fall down. It'll then contact the swing arm and cause damage to the bike. You can also damage the subframe. So I don't know why they haven't addressed that. It does have bolt-on passenger pegs, as you can see there. These are aftermarket side support racks from Tusk, and an aftermarket top rack from Tusk as well. This is the factory seat, which is very uncomfortable, but it is dirt bike style, sort of this one piece here. So it gives you good ergonomics for off-roading and not having the step seat. But on the flip side, on highway for more than a couple hours, it's quite painful to ride with. I don't have the factory tires. This bike would have come with Pirelli Scorpion Rally STRs, which are more of a 70-30 street-oriented tire. I've changed it out for 50-50 tires. These are Motoz Ral Z, and then a Tusk 2-track in the front. You can see our rear brake back here. Our rear setup, which is pretty nice and compact, although the turn signals do have a nice bit of floppiness to them. They really like to move around quite a bit, so not too sure about why they designed it that way. Chain drive. I do have a stand on the kickstand there just to help with that when you parked in soft soil and what have you. I have the Yamaha OEM quick shifter, and I should mention that the other two bikes come standard. Well, I don't know why I'm pointing over there. That's where the other bikes are. The other two bikes come standard with quick shifters. You don't have to pay extra. The Yamaha does not come with the quick shifter, and you have to pay about $200 for the part, and then if you pay for install, that could be whatever your dealership charges you. Is probably about an hour of labor. So you could be looking at potentially around $400 to get that equipped here. Consider that when you're comparing the price between the Tenere and something like the Transalp or the V-Strom. It doesn't come with that. You have to pay quite a bit to add that. So that's kind of disappointing that just wasn't standard. However, I will say we put it on. It's pretty easy to put on and it works very, very well. Coming up here to all our controls, Yamaha have changed quite dramatically the control buttons and layout for 2025, and I'm a big fan of it. The turn signals take a little bit of getting used to because they don't have a traditional cancel switch. You've got horn and you've got hazard lights down here. Home button, you've got a 4-way joystick, and you can push into select stuff. It works well. I really like this control layout. Flashed a big button here for the headlights. This is the aftermarket Viridian Cruise, and I mentioned that you can check these out. You can add this Viridian electronic cruise to any of these 3 bikes. And I have a discount code exclusive for you guys when you're ordering that. No matter which bike you have, use my link. You'll get a nice big discount there on the Viridian Cruise system. Mode button here, I really like how big everything is. The levers are adjustable. The clutch lever is not actually, just the brake lever there is adjustable for reach. Using the buttons to navigate the TFT is pretty intuitive and nice to use, and then you can go and do things like a menu. You can go down here, you've got things at the bottom, you can go into your settings and then change things in here. This TFT is the best in the group. It's phenomenal, it's beautiful, it's big, bright, contrasty. I love the portrait orientation. They just did a great job with this. You can choose from different layouts as well on the dash. They have 2 different themes. I'll try to show you the other theme here. Okay, here's the Explorer theme. And then for me, I like to use the Street theme. I just prefer it. They give you the same information, just laid out a little bit differently, but overall really like it. Now, they also made the electronics the easiest to turn off on this bike. So if you hold this down, I have it set to turn off ABS and traction control. However, you can set it just to turn off ABS and leave traction control on if you prefer. However, I will warn you, it's not an off-road traction control, it's a street traction control. So you're probably gonna wanna program it to turn both off. I like how easy it is to turn it off and on with a hard button, where the other bikes you have to do some menu clicking. The V-Strom's easy to do, the Transalp is kind of a pain in the butt. I would say this is the easiest to do, but on the flip side, you don't get like off-road rider aids in terms of really a dedicated off-road setting or dedicated off-road traction control, which the other bikes have. So it's kind of a hit and miss in terms of that. But all right, let's briefly cover the main specs of the Transalp and then take you on a brief walk around of the bike. So MSRP is $9,999 US, so it's the cheapest in the test. The wet weight is 460 pounds or 207 kilograms. The engine is a 755cc parallel twin, and the rated power is 83 horsepower, and torque is 55 foot-pounds or 75 Newton meters. Wheel sizes are 21-inch in the front and 18-inch in the rear. The seat height is 33.7 inches or 850 millimeters, which is just the V-Strom and the Transalp have the lower seat heights, and then the Tenere is quite a bit higher than those two. Let's see, what else do you care about? The wheelbase is 61.5 or 1,575 millimeters. Your major service intervals for like your valve inspection, the expensive services, that's 16,000 miles or 24,000 kilometers. Suspension travel front and rear is the lowest in the test. It's 7.9 inches in the front and 7.5 inches in the back. That's 200 millimeter front and 200 millimeter front and 190 millimeter in the rear. Fuel capacity on the Transalp is 4.5 gallons or 17 liters, and we'll cover the observed fuel economy and expected fuel range when we do the ride test for the bike. Okay, let's start a walk around of the bike. So you can see the low front fender on the Transalp doesn't have very much clearance there. If you have mud and rocks get jammed in there, it's going to be an issue. The Tenere does a much better job of giving you clearance there. Dual disc front brakes, you can see the Nissan calipers. You can see the front suspension here as well. And then our headlight, which is a new design for 2025. I think that's a big improvement. Our windshield, which has a little duct in it. LED lights, the side fairings coming around. You can see the exhaust and the engine here. The foot pegs, which are really on the small side, you can take this rubber insert out and then that's better, but it's still really small, and that would be one of the first things I would change out on this bike. The exhaust does come kind of underneath the engine here, and I don't love this design. It's pretty vulnerable, so you definitely want to get a skid plate to protect this. And one thing I really don't like about this bike, I've got the camera down here, you can see how this protrusion here sticks down. That's your oil pan. It's part of your engine. If the first time you go over a rock or something, if you hit that, you're going to be stranded. It's going to break the engine. So a skid plate mandatory on this bike for sure. Now, when you do the skid plate, the ground clearance is not as bad as people make it out to be. It's actually pretty close to the other bikes in reality, but you definitely do need to get a skid plate to protect that. Detachable passenger pegs there. You can see where our exhaust comes down here. And then the rear wheel and tire. This bike has these Metzler Karoo streets on it, which actually are not too bad. Big rear grab handle, a little bit of rear rack, the seat, which is comfortable. We'll talk about that. The rear lighting and fender setup. What else do you want to know? Chain drive, everything's a little bit dirty right now, so forgive that. Our shifter here, the other foot peg, the other side of the engine. Yeah, pretty basic, not too much to talk about. Your seat release is right there. And then our fuel tank. Moving up here to the controls and gauges, so I can flip the bike on. You've got non-adjustable clutch lever. You do have an adjustment for reach on the brake lever though, so that's good. They have changed the controls for 2025. This has some backlighting to it as well. Kind of a small button. It does work okay. And then you've got a horn mode button for your riding modes, turn signal, of course no cruise control, which obviously you got the hazard lights here, which I like having. And then coming up here, you don't have, you notice there's no GPS bar. The other two bikes have a bar to mount a GPS. This does not, so that could be an issue for some people. The TFT dash is fine. It's a little small, a little basic, but it does work. And then using my controls here, I can kind of go through and see different readouts. I'm not going to get all into this and how this works, but it's okay. It works fine. You can see the computer here at the bottom. It works okay. You get used to it. It's fine. Just not my favorite. It's not as good as the V-Strom for sure. Now, if I go in here to settings, then you can see your riding modes. You've got user modes, and then you've got the preset modes, which you can't change. You don't have much suspension adjustments on the Transalp. You can see you do have these preload adjusters here, but that's all you get for the front fork. And then on the rear shock, there's really not much you can do here. You can technically adjust the preload. It's hard to get the camera in here. There's a collar that I guess you can turn with a tool. I believe, yeah, it looks like it's an adjustable preload collar, but you'd have to have a special tool to do that. They really should give you a knob, a twist knob like the other bikes. That would be much better to have that. All right, let's quickly cover the specs and then take you a tour of the features of the VStrom 800DE 2025 and this very nice looking black color scheme, which I think is the first year they've offered this. MSRP is the highest of the group. It's $11,709. However, it comes with the quick shifter. Now, compared to the Tenere 700, you have to realize that the Tenere 700 does not come with the quick shifter. So if you add that price in with parts and labor, you're probably pretty much close to the price here of the V-Strom 800DE. Plus, this bike has the advantage of having the largest engine in the test. Anyway, let's get back to the specs. 507 pounds or 230 kilograms. It is notably heavier than the other two bikes in the test by about around 50 pounds or around 20 kilograms heavier. There are times you feel that and there are times you don't feel that. I tend not to feel that when I'm riding on or off road. I really honestly don't notice the extra weight. Pushing it in and out of the garage is when I do feel the extra weight. So spec sheets are not everything. You actually have to ride the bikes to kind of understand. The engine is a 776cc, the largest in the test, parallel twin. Wheel sizes, you've got a 21-inch front wheel, but unlike the other two bikes, you actually have a 17-inch rear wheel instead of the 18-inch on those other two bikes. A rated power is 83 horsepower, very similar to the Transalp, almost like they copied that. And then torque is the highest in the test, however, 58 foot-pounds or 79 Newton meters, which is noticeably more than the others. And this bike does have noticeably more mid-range power than either of the other two bikes here. Seat height is similar to the Transalp at 33.7 inches or 850 millimeters. Wheelbase is 61.8 inches or 1,570 millimeters. The Tenere has the longest wheelbase, but I would say all these bikes feel pretty stable, with maybe the V-Strom perhaps feeling the most stable, even though it doesn't have the longest wheelbase. The fuel capacity of the bike is the largest in the group, 5.3 gallons or 20 liters. We'll talk about the observed fuel economy and the estimated riding range when I do the ride test for the bike, but it's the best in the group. Suspension travel, it has the most. It's graced with the most suspension travel, so it gives the plushest ride. It's 220 millimeters front and back, or 8.7 inches. Now your major service intervals, your expensive services, the valve adjustments, things like that, is 15,000 miles or 24,000 kilometers, similar to the Transalp. But of course you have the Tenere over there, which has a much longer service interval, which will make the bike cheaper to own over the long term, because you'll be doing less service with the Tenere than you will with the V-Strom. All right, let's take a quick tour around the V-Strom. You have these kind of controversial headlights, which are these tiny little lenses. I will say they don't work well. They have too sharp of a cutoff at night. When you roll into a corner, you just can't see. You really need auxiliary lights on this bike. That was kind of a big fail there, in my opinion, for the design. Now, the windshield is adjustable. It's the only bike in the test that has, if you can see, three different levels you can adjust the windshield height. This is the stock windshield that comes with it. You can get a larger one from Suzuki or aftermarket, but I really like how they gave you the adjustable windshield. It's the only bike to have that. You can see here our Nissan brakes, similar to kind of what you see on the Transalp, our large 21-inch front wheel with a tube tire coming around. You've got your side fairings, the side of the engine. The bike will come with this sort of plastic, I hesitate to call it a skid plate, but I suppose it is a skid plate technically, but I would get something more significant than that. It's more of a plastic splash guard. It does, like the Tenere, it kind of has this subframe that comes down here under the engine. It's good for skid plate mounting. It's good for extra protection, so you're not just the first thing you hit. Off-road isn't the exhaust and the oil pan like the Transalp, which is super sketchy and super vulnerable. On the Honda, this doesn't seem to have that issue. And ground clearance is more similar to the Tenere than it is to the Honda, which is to say it's pretty decent oil sight window there. The foot pegs, which are decently large, and you can take this rubber insert out. I would still probably upgrade the foot pegs. Nothing can compare to the huge foot pegs you've got over there on the T7. The brake lever, which has this interesting little kind of guard here for your boot, so your boot doesn't, I guess, go in that way, but no adjustments there really on the lever itself, although you can adjust the height on any bike of the brake lever. Detachable passenger pegs. You do have the welded on exhaust hanger, kind of like you do with the T7, but I haven't heard any instances of this sort of bending in and hitting the swing arm like you do on the Tenere, so not too sure. The exhaust is a bit oversized and kind of silly looking compared to the other two on this, so I would kind of mark it down for that, but I mean, it's fine. You can see our suspension in here. You do have a very nice hand preload adjuster to dial in your preload for passengers, luggage, which the Tenere also has, but the Transalp does not have, so it's nice to see that. That's definitely something I look for. Grab handles, small rear rack, the seat, which is quite comfortable, quite plush, pretty good there. A rear lighting setup. This whole arrangement is very robust and these CDs don't flop around like the turn signals on the Transalp do. Moving around here, not too much else to see. Kind of dirty right now, apologies for that, but we do ride these bikes. Let's see, side of the engine, whatever, that's fine. Let's jump up here onto the control center of the bike. Talking about the controls, headlight, clutch lever. You do have an adjustable brake position there on your brake lever. You've got very chunky, nice, easy to use controls here. You've got a mode button and you've got the up and down button. So it works very, very well to go through here and control your traction control, drive mode, ABS settings, and then to scroll through down here at the bottom on your different trip settings. It's super intuitive, fast, easy to use. I really, really like how they've done that. You also get some nice things like temperature of the coolant, you get the air temperature gauge, pretty nice. Overall, the Tenere has the best TFT. It's the biggest and most beautiful. This is maybe the most functional though, because of the way you can easily, I think, access these settings and see them at all times. So I don't know. Overall, the Tenere has a nicer TFT, but the controls on this are really, really easy to use in terms of changing your rider aids. The buttons over here, super easy to use. You've got hazard lights like you would expect. And I think that's about it for the controls. And you can see you've also got your front suspension adjustments here, which you have preload, compression, and rebound, fully adjustable, just like you have on the Tenere. But then the Transalp, you don't really have any adjustments except for preload. All right, let's talk about seat height, riding position, top heaviness or lack of it, and then do the drop and lift test on all these three bikes. Okay, I'm gonna start over here and we'll talk about the V-Strom. So with these three bikes, the V-Strom and the Transalp have a seat height that is lower than the Tenere 700. The Transalp's also, between these two, the Transalp is the lightest. So we'll talk about how that works. Now, the V-Strom, let me jump on board here. Riding position of the V-Strom, actually the riding position of all these bikes is very upright and very comfortable. On the V-Strom, the bars feel the widest to me. The bars can be adjusted, of course, for the angle. The foot pegs are in a nice position, although not quite as low as I feel on the Tenere 700. But everything feels really good on this bike. Now, in terms of top heaviness, I can lean the bike over. First of all, you can see, so I should tell you, I am 5'10" or 178 centimeters tall. I have a 32-inch inseam and I weigh 200 pounds or 90 kilograms. So you can see I can easily flat foot the bike on both sides at my height. It doesn't feel tall. It doesn't really feel top heavy. So I can lean the bike over about that far before it feels like it's gonna fall over, right? Before it feels like it's overcoming the muscles in my leg and wants to fall over. Okay, let's take a look. Let's take a look at the Transalp. Now what I immediately notice in jumping on the Transalp is it feels the lowest of the three. The thing is, the seat height, I mean, yeah, you can play with your suspension preload a little bit, but sometimes the seat height on paper doesn't translate to real life because of the shape of the seats and how things are. The Transalp feels the lowest. It has the easiest reach to the ground of these three bikes. So I've got super easy reach to the ground. It feels the lightest of these three. It's the same weight as the T7, but it carries its weight much lower and it has lower seat height. So if you're a vertically challenged rider, if you're not quite as strong, the Transalp's gonna be the best bike in this group in terms of ease of handling and things like that. I can lean this bike really, really far over like this before it feels like it's gonna fall. Carries its weight well, it feels low to the ground. It's the most, I would say, accessible of these three bikes. Okay. Now we're going to move on to the Tenere 700. Tenere 700, I can already feel that extra height. So I cannot flat foot on both sides, even at my height. I wouldn't say I'm on my tiptoes, but I'm not flat footed. If I lift one leg up like that onto the seat, which I normally stop like this, and I can flat foot one side. Now it definitely feels the tallest because it is. It also feels, having jumped off those two bikes, and especially the Transalp, this feels the most top heavy by a significant margin. So if I start to lean this bike over, like even right about in here, it starts to feel like it's the pendulum, like it's really carrying its weight way up here, and it feels very, very tippy. So because you have a taller seat and because it carries its weight higher than the other two, it's like, whoa, if I get off balance a little bit, the bike wants to go down. So this is a bike that's better suited to tall riders, physically strong people, experienced riders, more so than those other two bikes are. All right, let's do our drop and lift testing. I already know how this is gonna go. I'm not looking forward to lifting that T7. That thing is a beast to lift. I've done this enough times already to know. Let's start with what I think will be the easiest, which is the Transalp. Okay, Transalp's over. All right, let's see how we can lift it. Okay, I was able... Oops, lost our microphone. Lost our microphone there. Hazards of the job. I was able to grab the handlebars and kind of lift with my legs. I felt a little stress in my chest a little bit, so you gotta be careful with the back stuff. But that wasn't too bad, actually. That was very manageable. Okay, so far the V-Strom, you feel that extra weight. It's about 50 pounds heavier, about 20 kilograms heavier. You feel it versus the Transalp for sure. Now I'm putting the bikes down kind of on their handlebar, so it makes my life a little bit easier. If I turn the handlebar, they'll go really flat and it'll just stress me out even more. So let's see how we do on this one. Okay, I wasn't that successful doing the handlebar lift on that one. It felt heavier, so I used the kind of back into the bike method. That worked for me in that case, and it definitely feels heavier than that, which it is. And now we're gonna get to the ultimate, the ultimate test, which is the Tenere 700. Okay. All right, here we go. Now I took about a 5-minute break to get my strength back because I don't want you all accusing me of, oh, he was tired when he did the T7. It's unfair test, unsubscribe. Yeah, so I took a short break and now let's do the T7. Okay, now the aftermarket CFMOTO crash bar I think is helping a tiny bit. It just maybe, you know, gives it a tiny bit of extra advantage versus not having any crash bars. So a little bit unfair there, but let's try some different lifting styles here. Okay, try not to use your back. Nope. Some people said turn the handlebar like this. That just makes it worse, guys. You guys are just out of your mind. Turn the handlebar like that. How does that make it easier? The bike's now even more flat. Yeah, I might be able to do that, but I'm really stressing my back on doing that style. Pardon my French, but this thing is a nightmare to lift. It's harder. It's harder than the other two by far. I'm glad that we have these side by side because for years I've been telling you that the T7 is top heavy, really difficult to lift up compared to other bikes, and I think we just proved it. I'm definitely the most stressed from doing this lift, which is funny because it's the same weight as this bike on paper, but it feels nothing like the Transalp when you actually have to lift it up. It's just the way that it carries its weight. It's just not good. I can do it, but it's a tough one. It's a tough one. All right, here's a new thing I'm putting into my tests going forward, which is the jump test. I wanted a controlled way to test the suspension performance of the different bikes I test. So I have here a 16-inch jump, and I ride the bikes off it around 15 to 20 miles an hour. And the idea is to see how the suspension performs when you put a lot of stress on it. So for this test, the Transalp bottomed out horribly front and back and felt very uncontrolled and even had a lot of secondary motion. The V-Strom did better, but still bottomed out pretty severely. The Tenere 700, however, passed the test without bottoming out, and it maintained very nice control, so it definitely was the winner by far of the suspension or the jump test.
All right, 0 to 70 miles an hour to 0, performance testing, Tenere 700. Feels a little slow and the brakes feel a little soft, but I'll have to kind of ride the other bikes to compare it. I noticed on the T7 that the power kind of drops off at the higher RPMs. It has power all the way to redline, but it doesn't seem to build power as much as the other bikes kind of on their way to the higher RPMs. So it's more of a low range and mid range motor, which a lot of people like. Okay, Tenere 700, I'm calling this the high speed sandy off-road test. Little bit of moisture today, little bit of moisture in the soil, so not super soft and sandy and dusty as it usually is. Traction control off, ABS off to the back wheel. Oops. $55 miles an hour. We'll try to go about, whoa! We'll try to go about 60 miles an hour, about 100 kilometers an hour. There we go, there's 100. Have to watch out for these ruts. And the rain just changed this trail quite a bit. This bike feels like it's making traction very well. Feels very well under control. Feel a little bit of wobbling in the front because of the sand, but that could be adjusted with suspension settings and tire pressure and body position and all that. I find that I rev the motor out pretty far and I still don't go super fast. Like, more horsepower wouldn't hurt. This has plenty to get yourself killed for sure, but more horsepower might be nice. All right, we're going to call this the flow trail. Kind of fast, flowy, double track, good suspension test. Good, it's got rocks, it's got dips, it's got corners, it's got some opportunities to go quick, it's got some tricky bits. This is designated here, it says wilderness study area, this sign, so this is where we'll start this portion of the test, so I remember that. All right, traction control off, rear ABS turned off. I actually carried the front wheel over that. This bike is so much fun. We're going about 40 miles an hour. You probably can't see the dash because I have to stand up to do this. Whoa! I hit those jumps about 40. That's pretty fun. Feels great. The suspension feels very good on this. Handling, I don't know, the handling I have a mixed feeling about, but we'll talk about that later. There does seem to be something about the way this bike has that anti-squat kind of geometry in the back, so when you accelerate, it just seems to sort of put the power down. Yeah, this feels very, very well in control. I don't really feel too limited by the bike. I feel more limited by my own fear of crashing and hitting something. Starting to get to some little rocky steps and stuff here. We'll have to be careful when we take the Transalp through here because she's got no skid plate on the Transalp, so that's going to be sketchy as hell. The ergonomics for standing up on the T7 feel perfect to me, just perfectly dialed. I wouldn't change a thing with the ergonomics on this bike. Not a single thing. You can get nice and forward as you should be off-road. Get that weight up over the front. And the windshield is well out of the way. You don't feel like you're going to hit the windshield with your head or with your helmet. Handlebars are in a perfect spot. Yeah, this bike is dialed. Really, really dialed. The brakes have a nice progressive feel. You can use one finger. I'm using one finger on my front brake. I should be covering my clutch. I need to get a better habit of doing that. Yeah, just bomb through on this bike. So you don't feel the top heaviness of it when you're riding. You just don't. The back brake, oh, almost crashed. See, sometimes I don't know what's going on with it. Maybe it's just the soil conditions, or I'm just not riding it well, but I lose the front end all the time on this bike unexpectedly, and I don't know what it is. I really don't know what's going on with it. So we'll end the test here at this BTM OHV sign right here. I was going to say the back brake is terrible. I push on the back brake and I just feel like it's just mush, like terrible back brake, and that does inhibit my control off-road on this. All right, it's time for the Twisty Mountain sport riding test on the Tenere 700. Now, I am fully aware that this bike has more off-road oriented tires than the other two, and so it may be at a slight disadvantage, but I'm not testing the bike in that manner. I'm not achieving maximum lean angles. I'm not doing instrumented testing. We're just getting a general feel for the motor, for the transmission, for the suspension, and for the handling of the bike, and I will try to keep the tires out of it as much as I possibly can. So, with that said, let's roll on the power a little bit here. So, tell you some things I'm feeling so far. Overall, the bike feels balanced and neutral and predictable. It doesn't feel particularly fast. In fact, the engine feels a little bit gutless when you try to rev it out and go a little bit faster. I feel like around 8,000 RPM, there's not too much more to give after that, which is fine, but braking feels good, handling just feels neutral, predictable. It doesn't have the fastest turn in or the sharpest feel, but it's not bad. Quick shifter, which this bike is fitted with, the Yamaha accessory, works extremely well. And I have no problem hustling this bike up the mountain here. Come on. I think we got ourselves a cattle grate here. Stand it up for that. Woo! All the way. 9,500 RPM is our red line on this bike. The suspension is good. Like, the suspension doesn't have those secondary motions of moving around, and feels very nice in terms of the suspension and the control, riding in a sporting fashion here on the mountain. And I think that's one of the most important things on a bike, is having that suspension, really good action, really good control, keeping those tires in contact with the pavement. And this does a very, very good job of that. I just do wish for, like, if I really want to get, if you're looking for like that adrenaline rush, this bike doesn't really have it. You know, 72 horsepower is not the most power. I feel like a little more power would make this bike more fun, for sure. Full power, full power, full power. Trail brake it. Yeah, it's a good bike for doing this. It's not the best, but it does just fine. Freeway test on the Tenere 700. That truck's like about to catch fire or something. I don't know what's going on with that. Okay, so keeping pace with the traffic here, about 80 miles an hour. It's very windy, if you can hear that. Windshield doesn't give you too much coverage, really. It gives you some, but the wind is blasting me about halfway up my face shield. So there's that. We're at, to go 80 miles an hour indicated, we're at 5,700 RPM. So that's 5,700 RPM at 80. There's very little vibration from the motor. The motor feels very smooth doing this. Let's see if we go 85. We're about 6,000 RPM at about 85 miles an hour indicated speed. And there's a lot of wind buffeting, but there's not really any vibration that I feel through the bike, so it's kind of a good and bad situation. But my helmet's really getting shaken, beaten all around everywhere. It's quite the windy experience here on the Tenere. Alright, I'm back to the same fuel station where I started, just a few miles from the house. So let's do our fuel mileage calculation for the entire test loop. Now, the bike gave me a low fuel light flashing at 130 miles. It's extremely pessimistic. There's no way that that's really accurate, because Yeah, this bike should have a 200-mile range, but it's flashing at only 130 miles. So it's kind of not very accurate in that way. Let's see, 143.3 miles divided by 2.664. 2.664. Okay, so I got 53.8 miles a gallon on the T7 on the test loop.
All right, so I came up with something called the Big Rock Report card, and I'm going to do this for all the adventure bikes I test on the channel from here on out. They'll be available for download in the description below. There'll be a little link to it, and I'll probably put them up here on the screen as well when I talk about them. So these report cards give you the basic specs of the bike, like the pricing, the weight, the suspension, you know, the wheel sizes, the seat height, the power, all that kind of stuff, major service intervals. Then I also put my observed or measured fuel economy, the estimated fuel range, and then I grade the bike in all these different areas and give you some test notes. So pretty cool. You can check these out, and we'll be doing these for all the bikes going forward, and we'll kind of see how it goes. So for the Tenere 700, I'm not going to read off the specs because you can do that yourself, and we probably covered it in a video already. Now, the observed fuel economy that I got on the Tenere was 53.8 miles a gallon, or 4.37 liters per 100 kilometers. So leaving half a gallon in reserve out of the 4.2 gallon or 16 liter tank, that gives us a fuel range of 199 miles or 320 kilometers, which is the worst in the test, and it makes sense since it has the smallest fuel tank by quite a good margin. Now, I will warn you that the computer on the bike, the TFT, will tell you that you're running out of gas at around 130 miles, but it is wildly off and pessimistic, and you have much more gas in the tank, so just something to keep in mind with that. All right, now let's get into the grading here on the report card. So off-road is where the T7 gets graded, I think, above these other two, and that makes sense. It's just really well developed for that. Suspension, I would give it a B+, solid B+, maybe even an A-. It's the only bike in the test that is set up out of the showroom to ride aggressively off-road. The spring rates are right on, the damping's right on, it doesn't bottom out even when ridden hard, and it just feels good. Handling off-road, B, it handles well. At very low speeds in technical terrain, you do feel the top heaviness, so I hope you're tall and I hope you're strong if you want to deal with that. Ground clearance, B. Rider aids, I do give it a D in rider aids, kind of a failing grade there for off-road rider aids because it doesn't really have them, and I think it should because the competitors do. It doesn't have a usable off-road traction control. It doesn't have a usable, really, off-road ABS setting, although you can turn the rear off, and I guess you would use that. But the other bikes have ABS settings, so you can leave the rear wheel ABS engaged and actually still stops you extremely well in the dirt. This doesn't have that, so I do have to mark it down there. Braking, I would give it a B off-road. Very good feel, good progression through the brakes. Off-road ergonomics, best in the test by far. Slim tank, great foot pegs, great bar position, perfect. So I give it an A, maybe even an A+ there. Off-road stability, I would give it a B, although again, you can change the handling characteristics of your motorcycle by changing the fork height, right? And messing around with your preload to do that. Stability, oh sorry, that was stability. Throttle response, B+, smooth, linear, good off-road throttle response. However, that's in the lower throttle response motor. I think they call it Explorer. I don't use the Sport throttle response. It's too jerky on this bike, so I just don't ever use it. On-road grades, suspension, B+, handling, C. I just think it's okay, not the best. Braking, on-road, C+, engine power, I would give it a C-. Compared to the other two, it feels very gutless in terms of power when you're riding on the highway or trying to do kind of sport riding. Rider aids, I would give it a B- for on the road. It's pretty basic. Comfort, so wind protection, I give it a C. It's okay, but not great. Engine heat, A. It doesn't make you hot. You don't feel any engine heat, and that is a huge win for this bike. Seating comfort, I give it a failing grade. Sorry, I give it a D. It feels like a 2x4 up your bum. It's hard, it's narrow, it's very uncomfortable compared to the other bikes in this test. Ergonomics for comfort, I give it a B. It's very good in that regard. Other ratings, shift quality, B. Headlight, C. It's just tolerable, not great, but that's most bikes. Lift test rating, I do have to give it a failing grade in that, so I give it an F. Overall fun factor, C+. I think that's going to depend if you're off-road or on the road. Off-road, it's pretty darn fun. On the road, I think that falls down because it just doesn't quite have the power that you want. And my test notes are here as well. All right, pros and cons on the 2025 Tenere 700. So the pros, for me, suspension, excellent. Engine smoothness and the low end power, very, very good. Doesn't have much high end power and it feels gutless in that regard, but low end power is great. The slim feeling of the bike, it really feels like a dirt bike, and that pays dividends off-road. The ergonomics for off-road is another pro. Just so dialed in on this bike. You can tell it was developed for off-road riding. The TFT dash. The TFT is gorgeous on here. This is the best display in the test, not necessarily the best electronics or features of the electronics, because it doesn't have some of those things like off-road rider aids, but the actual TFT itself is the best in the test and just wonderful to use and look at. The downside of the T7, the engine does feel gutless. It really does, sorry. It's tall. It's the tallest bike in the test, and it's top heavy. That's gonna put it out of contention for anybody really under my height, I would say. Like if you're under 5'10" or 1.78 meter, 178 centimeters, just don't even really look at it. It's just too tall and too top heavy, unless you're just a very, very expert level off-road rider and you're used to dealing with that. The wind noise, there is quite a bit of wind noise and buffeting from this bike. Another downside, the exhaust hanger, you know, it's still able to be bent, and I just don't like the design of that. I think that they need to fix that. Another downside of this bike, especially when you ride it back to back with other bikes, and that's the thing about these comparisons, is that if you just have this bike in isolation, you'd be like, oh, it's great. But when you test all these bikes like I do, you can see what the deficiencies are, and that's what comes to light. The rear brake is terrible. It just feels like it doesn't even exist, and it's really a problem. And then the other downside, we already mentioned that the rider aids are not very useful for off-road. One other downside I would have, which I didn't put here, but I just thought of, the clutch engagement is very on and off on this bike. It can be kind of awkward. The clutch is either on or off. It doesn't really have much progression to it, and I didn't like that.
All right, and we're back. Same test loop, obviously. So we'll start and we'll do the same test, 0 to 70 miles per hour, back to 0 on the Honda Transalp, and I'm in standard riding mode. All right, let's hit it. Whoa! Oh boy, those are some good G-forces going on there. Dang! You know, this Transalp, it'll surprise you. Like, this thing punches above her weight. I would say that feels like more than 83 horsepower to me, and it really above 5,000 RPM. Boy, you better be holding on. She really pulls hard in those high RPMs. Definitely has more high-end power than the other two bikes, although at the low end maybe it's a little softer, but then once the revs get up there, it really takes off. And the brakes felt good, not amazing, but they felt good. Okay, starting the off-road testing portion with the Transalp. The electronics are not my favorite in terms of making them easy to use. It's definitely the most kind of cumbersome of these three bikes to go in and change your traction control and your ABS. So on the user mode 1, I'm going to turn traction control off, although I will tell you, and I'll talk about this in the in-depth review of this Transalp, that they've dramatically improved the traction control from last year. So if you run the minimum traction control in the dirt, it actually works incredibly well, and I would probably not turn it off if it wasn't for this test and controlling the test. But it works incredible, lets you slide a lot, which is a dramatic change from last year. Anyway, so we'll put that off, and then you get the little light coming up here. And I got to figure out how to turn off the ABS. Okay, see, they really need to make this easier to use, because I can't figure out how to turn the ABS off. It's got to be in there, right? But that's not. Now, I'll start out by telling you that in practicing on this bike, the riding position, the ergonomics for off-road are not very good compared to the others. The gas tank is really wide back here, so when you try to stand up and get your weight forward, this wide gas tank is kind of difficult to get into a good riding position. It's just kind of awkward. The pegs are kind of too far forward, and they feel kind of high as well, so it makes the correct riding position a little bit hard to achieve, that attack position when you're standing, so you kind of end up sitting down a lot because it feels pretty awkward. It really prefers to be ridden sitting down, which means it's not really that great for aggressive off-road riding. You can make some changes to get used to it, and you can flip these handlebar risers around to get them further forward, which would help with the handlebar position. That bar is also too far back, but I'll show you what I'm talking about here. This bike is quick. Dang. There was 70 miles an hour. It's super, the engine is super fun, man. You'd actually be surprised how good these stock tires work if you just kind of give them a chance. Yeah, I mean, it feels like I'm struggling to, the suspension is not good. It feels like I'm struggling to get my riding position correct. It's just, I can't get really forward with those foot pegs and the gas tank kind of like that. So it's kind of awkward. God, this thing is quick. Jeez. This is definitely the fastest bike among these three by a pretty big margin. Okay. Gosh, it's so responsive. The suspension is bad though. When we get up here, we'll talk about that more. All right, we're at our off-road testing start, or for the suspension. And what did I call this last week? The flow trail? Yeah, here's our little marker. So this is where we start. These tires are surprisingly grippy, like in a straight line. Just the cornering, they do good with going forward, but the cornering is where we have an issue. There's some fluid leakage there. Human fluid leakage though. So one thing I have to remind myself that because I've got it's ridiculous engine protrusion sticking down, and I don't have a skid plate on this test bike, I'm in extreme danger of just ripping the bottom of the engine off on these rock steps and stuff. So I have to pick my line carefully and not drive over anything that I think I'm going to hit the bottom, because then I could be stranded out here with a broken engine case. So we're not going to do that. All right, so let's see how she does. So I guess let's just get it out of the way. The suspension is not good on the Transalp. So it wasn't good last year, it's not good this year. Now, let me explain. They've improved the settings a little bit, and I definitely feel like I can't go over these big rocks. I'm terrified I'm gonna tear the engine off. They've improved the fork. The fork is better than last year. It's still not very good, and it feels kind of crashes over the bumps. It's acceptable though, and has a better setup than last year. So they did improve that, but the shock, I don't feel like they really improved the shock. And the thing with the rear shock is, it's too softly sprung, so it crashes through the bumps and bottoms out constantly. And it just feels kind of harsh when you start to push it, right? And then you get the bottom out. So the control of the chassis is okay up to a certain point. Like in these smoother sections, you can really haul butt. But when you get to the rougher terrain, the suspension performance really lets the bike down. It means you have to slow down quite a bit, so you don't end up losing control due to loss of control and travel, in the suspension. Okay, so now that we talked about the bad part, the good parts of the Transalp are, it feels like a little rocket ship. It's lightweight, it's agile, it's responsive on the throttle. Like, it's a sporty bike. And if you improve the suspension and do a few ergonomic changes, I think this thing can be a real ripper. It's amazing how well it makes forward traction. Gosh, you can get going way too fast on this thing. Yeah, up to a point, and like in the smoother terrain, more rolling bumps, it's not terrible. And you can see I can whoa, whoa. You really gotta keep your weight forward though to keep the weight off that shock, because it really wants to bottom out. Okay. Gosh, you could just rock it out of the corners on this thing. This is so much faster than the Yamaha. Like it's not even close. The throttle response and forward, just a rocket compared to the Yamaha, and even compared to the V-Strom as well. I love that aspect of it. I'm actually kind of surprised how quick I can ride through here on these stock tires and without any protection on the bike, although I'm definitely taking a risk on that one. Just have to make sure the brakes, the off-road ABS, I mean, look at that, I can really haul it down. Remember, I couldn't figure out how to turn off the ABS, so whoa. This bike is absolute riot. Jam the rear brake. Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about having the rear, oh, I gotta watch the rocks. The nice thing about having the rear ABS left on, even though I didn't want to, is that I could just use all the brakes and the bike's not gonna slide out from under me. But if you had like really steep terrain and stuff, you'd be a little nervous without turning that off, because it might be too intrusive still. But on this kind of road, it actually works just fine to leave it on. Man, I'm super nervous about the bottom of that engine. We just got to really carefully pick a line and hope that we don't kick up a rock that just goes into it. It's just so incredibly vulnerable down there. Makes me cringe thinking about it. Because even on my bike with the skid plate, I've punched a hole. One time I punched a hole through a factory skid plate and punched right through the engine with a rock. And that bike had a skid plate on it. It wasn't a Transalp, it was a different bike, but I have a history of doing that, so. Yeah, this thing is super agile. It changes direction quick. Like, I feel like it's just like the unrealized potential, right? Because the ergonomics are a little strange, and then the suspension is kind of a big letdown. Although I think if you kind of just sit down most of the time, kind of rock it from corner to corner, pick a good line, it's really fun, and you can make really fast progress. Feels light, feels easy to ride. God, that's fun. Jeez, so responsive. This bike has so much unrealized potential, you know. Brakes are really good. Yeah, the suspension is definitely better, I think. I think it's more improvement than I initially thought from 2024, but it's still kind of a letdown compared to the other two bikes. And you don't have really many adjustments on the suspension either, and the other bikes have adjustable suspension, so that's kind of a downer. I think this is our stopping point, right? This is where we stopped the last one. Okay. Yep. Wow. This thing is a riot. I mean, some reservations, but geez, it's way more fun than I remember it being. All right, let's get the Transalp up Palomar here. So standard riding mode, and let's send it up the mountain. Dang, this thing is so much faster than the other two bikes. It's almost unfair. I don't know what Honda did with this thing, but whoa! I guess it's just the power to weight ratio, right? Go! Yeah, the motor is just fantastic. Just fantastic. It is let down a little bit, I guess, ultimately by the suspension. Just like off-road, it's like everything's kind of good, but the suspension's kind of bouncing around a little bit. It's not that great. You get kind of a lot of suspension dive when you're on the front brake as well. But besides that, this motor has so much mid and top end. Handling is good. It feels very quick to respond. You know, everything is better when you have less weight. You know, it's funny that the Tenere is also about the same weight, but this feels so much lighter. It's not even a comparison. And this has a lot more power than a Tenere as well. Dang, this thing is quick. Brakes are fine. Yeah, it just feels light on its feet. The whole bike just feels light, nimble, responsive, punchy. Not the best suspension. That's the only real negative that I would have. Also, I have noticed on this bike that the foot pegs, the clearance for the foot pegs is sometimes you will scrape the foot pegs even when you kind of don't expect to. I don't know if that's because the suspension is just like kind of going you know, through its stroke more and you're kind of running out of quartering clearance, or if it's just the foot pegs are just closer to the ground or whatever it is. But sometimes you'll kind of run up against foot peg clearance, although at this lean angle here I'm not experiencing that. It pulls so well. So much fun as well. Yeah, kind of a lot of brake dive there, not super well controlled, but still it's a pretty good experience. I think this bike would surprise some people for sure. It will surprise you. It's way more fun than people think. This is the most fun bike to ride in this group by far. It's not even close, like not even a comparison. Alright, let's put the Transalp on the freeway test here. I have a little bit of wind today, so that may impact us a little bit. We'll try to keep that in mind to get some wind kind of coming out of this direction here. Let's cruise. I was going to say set cruise, but we don't have cruise control. Let's cruise at about 80 miles an hour. Definitely feeling that wind, but overall, I can tell you the wind protection is very good on the Transalp. I'm probably moving through the air at about almost 100 miles an hour because we have a pretty strong wind coming at us. And it's very, very nice protection. At 80 miles an hour, my RPM is about 5,500 RPM at about 80, so it feels really relaxed. There's no vibration. This feels very, very comfortable doing this, and in fact I would say that this is just as good as a lot of the heavyweight big adventure bikes in terms of the wind coverage and the comfort cruising at this speed. The lack of vibration, roll-on power, of course, is very, very good. Yeah, I really have no complaints. The Transalp is an excellent bike for highway riding and for touring. If you have to do a lot of stuff like this, it's very, very good. This fairing is just very effective. Okay, I kind of messed that one up. I didn't even know until I turned the camera off. I was in 5th gear. I wasn't even in 6th gear. This bike is so smooth. So if I go 80 in 6th gear, I'm only at 4,900 RPM. That's it. I thought I was in top gear, but I wasn't. Yeah, so only under 5,000 RPM at 80. It just feels super relaxed now that I'm actually in top gear. I'm such a doofus. I can't believe. Alright, let's do our fuel mileage here on the Transalp on the test loop. 146.3 miles, 0.3 divided by 2.631. 55.6 miles per gallon. I will convert that below, and all of the mileage for all the three bikes will be in the report card or the PDF or whatever I decide to end up doing. That'll all be recorded down, but that's pretty good mileage, I'd say.
All right, let's do the BRC, or the Big Rock Report card, for the Honda Transalp 750 2025. You can download this below, of course. Now, the observed fuel economy, I got 55.6 miles per gallon, or 4.23 liters per 100 kilometer. Keeping a half gallon in reserve out of the 4.5 gallon or 17 liter tank. That gives me a calculated fuel range with that half gallon reserve of 222 miles or 357 kilometers. That puts it about halfway between the Tenere, which is the lowest in test, and the V-Strom, which is the best in test. All right, let's get into the gradings here. So off-road gradings on the Transalp is where I think it struggles compared to the V-Strom and the Tenere. So the Tenere is the best off-road, the V-Strom is second best, and then this would be the third best off-road. So suspension, I do have to give it a C-, rough and bouncy, bottoms out very easily, not very well controlled, and doesn't give you confidence really to ride quickly in a controlled manner off-road. Handling, off-road, I give it a B. It does handle well, other than the suspension that we talked about. Ground clearance, a C-. I almost want to give it a fail grade, but I wouldn't give it a fail grade because there's other adventure bikes that have a lot less ground clearance than us, believe it or not. You're going to put a skid plate on it to protect that oil pan, of course, otherwise you're going to break your engine on your first ride because of how that thing protrudes. But the ground clearance is not as bad as you think. It's probably within an inch or 30 millimeters from the other bikes. The rider raids, I give it a B. It's for 2025. It's got fantastic off-road traction control. It's got fantastic off-road ABS, and I was really surprised by that. That's a big improvement from 2024. For off-road braking, I give it a B. For off-road ergonomics, I almost want to give it a fail grade, but I'll give it a C-. It is very wide here at the gas tank. The handlebars are kind of awkward. The foot pegs are awkwardly forward, so it definitely feels like a street bike. When you try to stand up and get in attack position off-road, doesn't do very well for that. Of course, you can deal with some of that in the aftermarket or making adjustments. Stability off-road, I give it a B-. Throttle response, I give it a B. Good, no complaints with that, and you can change your throttle response modes to change how the throttle responds if you want to. On-road rankings. Suspension, I'll give it a C. It still shows the budget suspension, even on the road. Handling, though, I give it an A-. Despite the suspension not being great, it handles sharp and agile. I think it's helped by the light weight and just a good chassis overall. Braking, give it a B. Engine power, B+, maybe even A-. Like, it feels the fastest and sportiest in the test. That makes sense because it has the best power to weight ratio. If you look at the power to weight ratio on your report cards here, this is 5.54 pound per horsepower, so it carries the least amount of weight per horsepower of all these three bikes by a pretty significant margin. That's why it feels the fastest, because it is the fastest. Rider raids, I'll give it a solid B for on the road. Comfort, that's where the Transalp I think does the best, probably the best in the test. It's got excellent wind protection, so I give that a B+. Engine heat, I don't feel any engine heat. Unlike the V-Strom, which is like riding an oven, this is very cool, so I give that an A. Seat comfort, very good, similar to the V-Strom, give it a B+. Ergonomics, good for on-road, I give it a B. Other things, shift quality, A, very good. Headlight, C, it's just okay. Lift test rating, C+. Overall fun factor, B+, maybe even getting to A-. That's very good in that regard. It's just super light feeling and super sporty engine. All right, pros and cons for the 2025 Transalp. Pros for me, sporty engine and it feels fast. Another pro, it feels very light in all regards, and it is light, and it doesn't have the top heaviness, so another bonus, it just feels very light, very agile overall to deal with. The low seat height, yeah, so if you're shorter, if you're not quite as strong, not as quite as advanced of a rider, the lower seat height and combined with the low center of gravity and the lower weight is a game changer on this compared to the other two. It really does give you an advantage there. Nice low seat height. Another pro, the touring comfort, the wind protection, the sort of the relaxed RPM at cruising speed. You saw I was in 5th gear on the freeway. I didn't even know I wasn't in top gear. The thing was just so relaxed feeling. It was even better when I actually put it in top gear. So really good for that. Also, as a pro, great, surprisingly good off-road rider aids, although they're finicky to use and do the settings, and that could be made a lot better. But the traction control off-road and the ABS off-road work phenomenally well. Give them a try. Don't count them out. Transalp downsides for me. The low-slung engine oil pan is a real oversight there. I think if you have to put a skid plate on this bike, just no matter what, you have to have a skid plate. The non-adjustable soft suspension, the only adjustment you really have is some preload adjustments, but that doesn't do anything for the damping or for the inappropriate spring rates that this bike has, which is too soft. The somewhat annoying electronic interface, I think that could be done better. Not super happy with it. It's not terrible, but it's just not quite as easy to use as the other bikes in the test. Another big downside on the Transalp, of course, and I don't know if we've gotten to that yet in this video, because I shoot these videos in these segments, but the air filter access for maintenance, if you ride in dust, is terrible. You have to remove a lot of the fairing, the dashboard, the fuel tank has to come off the bike to get to the air box. What a big downside. If you're doing a lot of dusty riding conditions, I would think twice about getting this bike, because that's a real problem. The other downside is the lack of it doesn't have a wheelie knob preload adjuster for the back, so it's kind of a lot more difficult to change your shock preload when you put on luggage or a passenger. I don't like that. The other bikes do have a wheel knob thing to change it for a quick adjust. And then just sort of your lack of features. I guess for the price point that makes sense. It's cheaper than the other ones, but like you don't have the rear preload adjuster, there's no USB port, it doesn't even come with like basic plastic handguards, so you kind of feel like where's some of the features that you might expect.
All right, last but definitely not least, the VStrom 800. Let's do 0 to 70 back to 0 on the VStrom. We're going to run TC1, which is kind of like a sport setting. We're going to run drive mode B, which is standard, and ABS 1, which is a little less intrusive, but still road ABS. Okay, let's send it. Okay, I feel like we got a bad start. Something because I started in the dirt, it kind of triggered the traction control. So let's do it again. Yeah, there we go. Dang. Okay. All right. You know what? Without being instrumented, without having instruments, it's hard to tell, but I almost feel like that might have been the best of the group. If the brakes felt the strongest, I think, of the three bikes. The acceleration felt very linear, like it has power. The motor has power at all RPM. It just pulls evenly all the way to redline. Whereas I feel on the Transalp, you have to wait for the power, and on the T7, the power runs out at high RPM. This just pulls evenly everywhere, and it feels like it has the most torque as well. I would say this might be the best engine in this test if you rate it in sort of linear power delivery, and it definitely has a torque advantage over the other two because it's a little bit bigger. The electronics seemed to work well. The brakes felt very, very strong. I think this might be the winner of that test, but again, it's hard to say without like instrumentation and more controlled testing. Okay, let's begin off-road testing on the VStrom 800DE. So let's set up our electronics. Now the VStrom, in my opinion, has the best electronics package of these three bikes. Here's why that is. It's got an absolutely fantastic gravel mode for the traction control, which works phenomenal off-road, and it's just so natural. I used this on the Northern California BDR when I rode this bike on the BDR last summer, and I used it the entire route. It's awesome. And everything's super easy to change. Everything's right here. Traction control, drive mode, and ABS, boom, right on your dash. Three things, cycle through there and change it. Now for the test, of course, we're turning traction control off because that's what we've chosen to do to keep all three bikes even, but that's mostly because the Tenere doesn't have off-road traction control, unlike the Transalp and the V-Strom that do have off-road traction control. So again, now drive mode we'll leave in standard, which is B. ABS we're going to turn off. Now number two is street. Number 1 is like more of a off-road tuned ABS, and then you can also easily turn the ABS off to the rear. It doesn't have a feature to turn off both wheels, but I don't care. I don't need that on an adventure bike. So we'll turn ABS off. Now, I have tested ABS level 1 on this bike. It works really well in the dirt. And in fact, when I did that 1,000-mile trip on this bike last year, I only turned off the ABS for about 20 minutes during that entire 1,000-mile off-road trip. So it's very good. But for this test, we're turning the rear ABS off because that's what we've been doing. Except on the Transalp, I couldn't figure out how to do it. So we didn't do that, but that's all right. So let's take a ride. Now, in terms of ergonomics on this bike, it does have a little bit of a fat tank, kind of like the Transalp, but it's a little bit, I feel, more tapered. It's got a little bit more place for your legs. I could rotate these bars. It doesn't have adjustable bar risers like the Transalp, but I could rotate these forward to get a little bit better riding position. The foot pegs are they're not as good as the T7 in terms of position for standing off-road, but they're not bad. They're better than the Transalp. The ergonomics are decent. I would say they're halfway between. The Transalp is more set up for street. The Tenere is set up more for dirt. I would say this is a good halfway point in terms of the ergonomics for off-road riding. Tires, okay. Yeah. Woo! Ho-ho! Yeah, boy. 70 miles an hour again. I would. I actually think that this bike, the V-Strom, has the best sort of straight line stability or sort of stable geometry for off-roading. It just, and I've noticed this when I tested this last year, it just has this feeling that it just wants to keep going in a straight line. It's not the most agile bike, and we'll get to that, but for straight line stability and sort of not deflecting off things, man, it really yeah. Whoa. Oh shoot. Okay, I gotta remember, I've got my rear ABS turned off. I almost swapped ends there with the rear coming around. Whew, that was scary. Okay, don't do that. Gotta remember, no rear ABS. Gotta be careful with the rear brake when I'm slowing down from 70. Yeah, the V-Strom has this feeling of just sort of tractoring through, straight through everything, and it's nice. It's a very confidence inspiring feeling. So we'll get up here to our other test area. We'll talk more about it. DE. The V-Strom has the most suspension travel. It's got a little bit more travel than either of the other two bikes. That helps it give it a little bit more plush feeling ride. Although we'll talk about how it's still undersprung, which is a common problem with bikes these days, or all time actually. But anyway, let's ride and talk about it. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of the test, hopefully I've got tire pressures are the same on all the bikes. The suspensions are all set to the factory settings for all the bikes. So we try to even things out the best we can. All right. So let's ride and chat on the V-Strom. I'll point one thing out first of all. I have a lot of experience with all three of these bikes, but I have a lot of recent experience with the V-Strom. Having done the Northern California BDR, this bike is really good if you want to conserve energy and sit down all day off-road. Like, it just works for that. It just works for that. You still should stand up, you know, when you're navigating trickier situations and things like that, but you can sit through everything with this bike. Next thing I want to talk about on the V-Strom is the tractability. Well, watch this. Second gear, 1500 RPM. No throttle. Now the Tenere is pretty good in this regard as well. The Transalp not as much, but the tractor factor of this engine, it refuses to stall. Like I'll go uphill with no throttle in second gear. I bet you it won't even stall. I mean, it might, because this is a steep hill, but look at that. It's such a tractor. And then pulling away, it has more low-end torque than either of the other two. So it has the advantage of having a bigger engine. It's just such good power delivery for off-road because it comes right off the bottom so clean, and the fueling is perfect on this bike, better than the other two. But then when you want to rip and go fast, when you want to rip along and really haul, whoa, then the engine is very responsive. It doesn't feel quite as fast as the Transalp, although it's close. But the Transalp, I still feel like feels a little bit more responsive. But this is very good, very close to that. The Tenere by far feels the most sluggish and sort of out of breath. But this bike is remarkably composed through rough terrain up to a point. Now, the suspension being very softly sprung, it does have adjustability for preload and for your damping. That's good, but it's still too softly sprung. Now, what this means is that it has a very plush, comfortable ride. This is the most comfortable bike in the test to ride off-road. It's a super plush, comfortable to do this all day long. But there comes a point when you start pushing it harder that the soft suspension, just like on the Transalp, although it happens later than the Transalp, where the suspension and the chassis fall apart on this, but you have to be riding it pretty quick to start feeling that. But if I start to push like this, which the bike wants to do because it's got all this power, the suspension blows through the stroke, bottoms out, all of that. So I think it would be the easiest, well, it would be easy to tune the suspension with some different springs. I feel like the underlying componentry is good. The damping settings are good, have good adjustments, good preload adjustments, but if you just correct the springs, I think this would be really, really good. Whereas the Transalp, you're just kind of, I think it's hard to make that suspension work well. So this is I don't know that this is as much fun as the Transalp, and it's also not as natural for going fast off-road as the T7, but ridden at a moderate pace, I actually think this is the best because it has this super controlled ride, incredible stability going through all this chop. It doesn't deflect. The suspension just soaks things up. The throttle response is really good. The torque at the low end is very, very good. This bike doesn't really have a skid plate, so I probably should be careful where I'm pointing it. But this, at a moderate pace, actually, I think this feels really good. The Tenere feels good as well. A little bit more stiff, I guess, than this. The ergonomics are, they're pretty good on this. They're close to the T7. I still think the T7 has a more natural dirt bike, more of a dirt bike feel with the slim gas tank and the foot pegs in a better spot and the bars kind of forward. This is a little more relaxed ergonomics, which tends to favor sitting down, but it also feels good standing up as well. The Transalp doesn't feel good standing up. This does. I kind of think that this is the best bike for the balance between on and off-road performance. I actually kind of feel that that's the way it is. It sort of, to me, has some of the off-road stuff I like from the T7, but then it has some of the on-road characteristics I like from the Transalp. But God, it's just plowing through these rocks like that. It just doesn't care. It just doesn't care. And the suspension feels great up to the point where then it bottoms out and you start to have issues, which happens sooner than it would on the Tenere, but not as soon as it does on the Transalp. It's very put together. This feels sophisticated and refined, and like they really spent time dialing in this bike. It really feels put together, whereas the Transalp, wow, look at that. The Transalp feels more like it's a road bike trying to go off-road, and this feels like it was actually designed to do this. Okay, there we go. Okay, the off-road test portion's technically over, but I do want to make a point about the electronics. So I'm going to ride the rest of this trail and just enjoy it, right, with the camera turned off. But actually, the bike, I think, works a lot better with traction. I'm going to turn the gravel mode on and turn the ABS back on to number 1. For this type of riding, at the speed I'm riding, I actually feel it performs better with a better safety margin as well with those settings. I can use more throttle without, especially with these street tires, without fear of the bike totally getting away from me. The ABS works great. And again, because I'm limited on traction with these more road tires, having these off-road electronics is a frickin' it's amazing. I'm turning it back on. I prefer to ride with them, even though for the test I had them turned off. So just making a point about that. Okay, Palomar Mountain. It's time to rip up on the VStrom 800. I think it's going to be good. All right, so traction control number 1, the less intrusive setting, drive mode B. Now, people are going to argue and say that, oh, the bike's faster in drive mode A. That's incorrect, wrong. A lot of people don't understand drive modes. It's not like a reduced power mode. It's just the throttle is slightly less responsive in B and C. So I prefer B. It's like a direct throttle. A is like over boosted, which I don't like. It doesn't make the bike faster. It has the same horsepower in A and B. And I believe even C has the same power. I don't think it's reduced. So anyway, it's important to understand how drive modes work, and then ABS setting number 1, which is good, allows us to have just the tiniest bit of slip if we want to have a little bit of play time going into the corners, sliding the back just a little bit there. Yeah, this motor is powerful. This bike is quick. So, okay, a couple things I'm noticing compared to the other bikes. Number 1 is that, look at this, the mid-range power, like let's say between 4,000 to 6,000 RPM. Yeah, look at that. This thing is way more powerful in that mid-range than either of the other 2 bikes. It's a very noticeable difference, and this has a big advantage there. At the other hand of it, like, look, it has top-end power, almost as good as the Transalp. So it's got power at all RPM, whereas the T7 is gutless at the, you know, kind of the upper range. The Transalp is gutless at the low end. This has guts everywhere. So I think this is the best engine, actually. Let's talk about the handling of the bike. So I don't know exactly what it is. Brakes feel nice and predictable there. I don't know exactly what it is, but as I was saying, I think that this bike feels the most, it feels like it's the most glued down to the road, like it's on rails almost. Like, I don't know if maybe it has a longer wheelbase, or it's the extra weight doing that, or something in the geometry or the suspension. But this bike, to me, is the most confidence inspiring, I think, on a road like this. The Transalp was good. I liked it. But to me, this just feels the most, I guess, yeah, the most glued down, the most composed, I think. Maybe it's because it's got really good power. It's got good brakes, and the suspension is also really good. It's got better suspension than the Transalp. Maybe that's what it is. Yeah, it just feels awesome. Like, I have a lot of confidence in really throwing this thing up this road. Yeah, I think I'm kind of surprised. I thought that the Transalp was the best at this, but I actually think it might be this bike. The Transalp might feel a tiny bit faster, but this is close. they have the same horsepower on paper, and this is heavier. So yeah, maybe this is not quite as quick, but this feels, I feel like I prefer the handling of this the best out of all the three. It just feels the most grown up, the most like probably best suspension for doing this. The chassis is the best, and the motor is so great because at any RPM you just have so much power available. Yeah, this bike is awesome. This bike feels really fantastic doing this. I'm really surprised because usually a bike that's good off-road is not very good at doing this, but somehow Suzuki, they've done a great job at balancing the on and off-road handling of the bike. It definitely, I think, has a better balance between the two than either of the other bikes, I would say. All right, let's get the the V-Strom out on the freeway here and see how we go. It's not real windy. There's not much wind today, so pretty neutral wind conditions. That's good. This bike has such good mid-range power. You can short shift it and still accelerate really well. Okay, come on, let's merge here, please. Let's merge, come on. Use the accelerator on your vehicle. You have an accelerator pedal. Thank you. Okay, there we go. 80 miles an hour on the V-Strom. We're at 5,600 RPM at 80. So the weather protection is not very good. I would say it's more similar to the Tenere. It's not nearly as good as the Transalp. You don't have that fairing, so it's kind of just the wind comes through here. You can, of course, get aftermarket windshields and improve that situation, but as it is factory, the windshield, I did move it to the high position. It's a pretty windy ride. Now, vibration from the engine. So the V-Strom does have a little bit more vibration through the handlebars than either of the other two bikes, and there's certain RPMs where you feel it more. I feel like around 5,000 RPM there's kind of a harmonic vibration, and then there's maybe another one about 6,000 RPM. So it comes and goes. It's not a deal breaker and it's not bad, but it is something that I notice a little bit more than on the other bikes. But the bike feels pretty comfortable doing over 80 miles an hour here. It's just other than the wind blast, because it's just really very little wind protection here to speak of. Okay, let's do our fuel mileage calculation. This bike, I think it used more gas than the other two. So 132.8 miles divided by 2.492. 2.492. Oh, 53.29. Check that again. 2.492. Okay, that's pretty good. It's still, yeah, I got 53. So the other bike got, the computer says I got 48. So the computer is really pessimistic on this bike. Huh, interesting.
All right, let's go over the BRC, or the Big Rock Report card for the V-Strom 800DE. I'm not going to read off all the specs. You can do that on your own, and we probably covered that throughout the video already. Now, with the observed fuel economy that I got of 53.3 miles a gallon, or 4.41 liters per 100 kilometer, and a 5.3 gallon or 20 liter tank, leaving a half gallon in reserve, and we don't count half a gallon to calculate the fuel range, 256 mile fuel range, or 412 kilometers. The best in the test, because again, they all have similar mileage, but you have a much bigger fuel tank on here, which is really, really great. All right, let's get into the report card segment. And again, you can download this below. This will be below in the description. So for off-road, the V-Strom, I think, did pretty well. Suspension, I gave the V-Strom a B, handling a B, ground clearance B, rider aids A-, very, very good. useful traction control, useful off-road ABS, and everything is very easy to switch on the dash, so very good grade there. Braking off-road B, ergonomics off-road B, although I might switch that to like a B minus or a C plus, just because this tank is still a little bit wide. The foot pegs are not the best position, but they're pretty good. Handlebars, you can rotate them and move them around. Stability, off-road B plus, very, very good on this bike. Maybe even move that up to an A minus, probably should do that. Throttle response, A minus, very smooth linear throttle delivery for off-road. It's super easy to ride off-road in terms of throttle response. Okay, let's move to the on-road rankings for the V-Strom. Suspension, B plus, very, very controlled. Good damping, just a little bit undersprung. That's what keeps it from getting the A grade there. Handling on the road, I do give this an A. This is one of the best road handling mid-weight adventure bikes I've tested. I'm very impressed with it. Braking, I give it a B. Engine power, I give it a B plus. And rider aids for on the road, I give it a B. Good rider aids, but maybe not the best out there. In terms of comfort categories for the V-Strom, it doesn't quite match up to the Transalp, but it's getting close in some areas. Wind protection, I give it a C. You don't have a lot of wind coverage here, although you can get different windshields from the aftermarket or from Suzuki. Engine heat is a factor in comfort because it makes you hot, and unfortunately I give this a failing grade in that, so I give it a D for engine heat. It's very hot on the rider. Seat comfort was very good. I would say equal to the Transalp, so I give that a B plus. And ergonomics are good overall, so I give that a B. Other rankings here, shift quality A, very good shift transmission and very good quick shifter. Headlight, unfortunately I have to give it a fail with a D grade because it just doesn't work well at night. The cutoff is too sharp, and in corners you can't see anything. Lift test rating, I give it a C, and overall fun factor a B. My test notes, we've already kind of covered that throughout the video, but you can see that here on the report card. All right, let's talk about pros and cons summary for the V-Strom 800DE. So for me, the pros, the suspension is very supple and very compliant and very nice, both on and off road. It is a little bit undersprung, but overall the ride quality is excellent. The next step for me, tractable engine, linear power, and a lot of torque. It has the most torque of the group because it has a displacement advantage over the other two bikes. The electronics, super easy to use and interact with, and even off-road, you've got off-road ABS settings that work great. You've got an off-road traction control, the G mode, which works fantastic. So very, very good there. Another pro for me, great road handling on this bike. It just feels like it's on rails going through the canyons, just super planted, and I really enjoyed that. Another pro for me on the V-Strom that stands out, and these are just the things that stand out, there's a lot of other pros, the adjustable windshield bracket. So although you do have to use tools to do it, unlike the other two bikes, at least you can adjust the height of your windshield, which is very, very handy. What are the downsides of the V-Strom? So there's vibration at certain RPMs that a little bit more than the other two bikes. Whereas the T7, I never feel vibration. The Transalp has a little bit of buzz here and there. The V-Strom at certain RPMs, there's like a harmonic vibration that's annoying. Another downside to this, the bike is heavy, and you feel that when you're stopped and kind of when you're doing real slow speed stuff. I don't really feel the difference in weight while riding compared to the other two. And in most situations, I think it actually feels lighter than the Tenere, but the weight does make itself known in certain situations. Another big downside for me is the engine heat on your legs and lower body is pretty severe on this bike, and it's one of the only major things I don't like about the V-Strom. Next downside for me is the undersprung suspension. We've talked about that, that's common in motorcycles, but now that you have the Tenere for 2025 with really solid suspension, this compared to that does show that it's pretty soft and pretty undersprung compared to that. All right, now here I've got some FAQs, some frequently asked questions that I've received from the audience, from you, that I don't think I've covered in other segments of the video. So let's run through this as fast as we can in kind of a rapid fire fashion. Why is the Aprilia Tuareg 660 not in this test? Great question. There's a couple reasons for that. One was availability. I was unfortunately not able to get a hold of an Aprilia Tuareg 660 to include in this comparison. But that's not the only reason. The other reason is cost. The Tuareg is substantially more money than any of these three here. And the third reason is I really kind of wanted to keep this to the three volume selling, the highest best selling Japanese midweight adventure bikes and those are the three bikes you see right here. While I personally feel the Aprilia Tuareg is an incredible motorcycle and does outperform all these three bikes for not too much more money, the fact is it's a much lower volume seller and there's much less people looking at it because it's a smaller brand. All right, next question. Why is the KTM 790 Adventure or the CFMOTO 800 MTX not in the test? Those are good questions. Again, I would go back to them not being a Japanese middleweight adventure bike because of how these sell in such higher volume. Also because the KTM 790 Adventure, there is no 2025 790 Adventure brought to the United States. Very funny. It's interesting that KTM did that with, I guess, probably everything's going on with them, so that wasn't available, although it is close in price to these, and I think would give these bikes a real hard time in the comparison test. And then the CFMOTO 800 MTX, we don't get that particular model here in the United States. It appears to be basically a copy of the 790 Adventure R. I wish we did get it, but we don't get it, so I'm not able to have that bike here for comparison. All right, the next question. In stock form, which of these bikes is the best off-road? The Tenere 700 in stock form, especially with the 2025 updates, is by far the best of these three bikes for off-road riding. It's really, that's a very easy answer. In stock form, which is the best on the road? Okay, I would give you probably, it's a tough decision on that. The Transalp feels the fastest and I think is the most engaging to ride. The VStrom might actually have the best road handling. Both of these are, I'm sorry, I'm pointing at the wrong bikes. Both of these are very comfortable. So it would be either one of these bikes. The Tenere definitely loses out to these two in terms of overall highway performance. In stock form, which of these three bikes is the most comfortable? Okay, it's the Transalp. The reason that the Transalp is the most comfortable overall, it's got a great seat, it's got good ergonomics, but however, one of the things that sets it apart is it's got the best wind protection among these three bikes. It also has no engine heat on the rider, as opposed to the VStrom, which and otherwise is very comfortable, but the VStrom suffers from really, really bad engine heat, which makes your lower body feel like you're inside of an oven, and that really marks it down in terms of comfort. Which bike has the best factory suspension? Okay, the Tenere 700 by far and away has the best suspension here. The spring rates are spot on, the damping is spot on, it's got great adjustments, it doesn't bottom out, it feels good everywhere. By far that has the best suspension. Which bike has the lowest cost of maintenance? It's probably going to be the Tenere 700 because the distance between the major service intervals is the longest on the Tenere 700. Which of these bikes is best for a short rider? The Transalp. It has a low seat height relative to the Tenere, although it's similar to the VStrom. But what the Transalp also has is it's very light and it has a low center of gravity. It feels the lowest to the ground, it feels the least intimidating, and it's going to be the best for a shorter rider, a newer rider, or somebody who's not super strong. Which of these bikes is best for a tall rider? Okay, that's the Tenere 700. See, pros and cons, right? Compromises. So if you're really tall, you're going to fit the Tenere 700 the best. It's got the roomiest ergonomics, the best standing position. If you're tall, you're going to like the tall seat height, the high stance that it has, and it's going to be great for you. Which of these three bikes has the best fuel range? That's the VStrom 800. They all get very close in observed miles per gallon when I measured them, but the VStrom has the largest fuel tank at 5.3 gallons or 20 liters, and it has the best fuel range of these three. Refer back to my report cards. Which of these bikes is the best balance in terms of performance, in terms of both, considering both on-road and off-road riding? It's the VStrom. It's the VStrom. All right, let's try to wrap up with some final thoughts in this comparison test. So going back to my initial thoughts when we opened the video, I do think it's really challenging when you have a shootout like this to really say that one bike is better, just quote unquote better than all the rest, because it doesn't take into account your individual needs as a rider. So here's how I would sum this up, okay? I didn't want to pick a favorite and I didn't want to pick a winner in this comparison, but after testing all these bikes and doing everything I can to compare them in the most scientific way I can think of, I actually do think a winner has emerged, at least in my opinion. So the Tenere 700 is a great off-road motorcycle, especially with the improvements they've made for 2025. It is top heavy, it is tall, and it's not perfect, but for an aggressive off-road rider, you're going to be very happy. The Transalp, on the other hand, is a great road bike. It's snappy, it's quick, it's comfortable, it's got a lot of good things going on, but it's not great when it comes to off-road. Going back to the Tenere for a second, all the good things I said about it off-road, it really kind of falls down for me on the highway in terms of comfort and features and things like that. Now, that leads me to the VStrom 800DE. The VStrom takes a lot of good things from the Tenere on the off-road, a lot of good things from the Transalp on the road, and puts them together into one overall package that I really genuinely feel offers the best combination of characteristics for on and off-road performance and touring and everything together, the best combination of everything into one package. There's only a couple things that bug me about the VStrom. The engine heat is very bothersome if you live in a hot climate. If you're riding above 85 degrees Fahrenheit very often, then I think the engine heat is kind of a problem. It's also a little bit heavier than the other two, but I only noticed that when I was pushing in and out of the garage. When I was riding it, I never felt that. So I'm not saying the VStrom 800 is the best bike here, but I am saying that I think in terms of overall performance, I think I would have to give it the title of the winner of this comparison test. However, of course, depending on what you're doing with the bike, your answer as to which of these bikes is best for you could be something totally different. All right, well, if you want to support the work I'm doing here, there's ways to do that down below in the description and the pinned comment. I hope you will support Big Rock Moto. There's a lot of ways to do that. I hope this has been useful and informative. Thanks for watching. Ride safe. I'll see you out there.